The moment that broke me didn't look dramatic. No storm, no shouting, no grand betrayal. Just a chair, an empty room, and a truth I had run from for years finally catching up to me. It arrived quietly, almost gently, like grief wearing soft shoes. I was 38 years old. I'd been working steadily. I had enough money in the bank that I wasn't panicking about rent anymore. I had relationships that looked good from the outside. I had a career trajectory that was moving upward. By every measurable standard, my life was working. So I couldn't understand why I felt like I was suffocating. I remember sitting there staring at nothing, while life kept moving around me as if I wasn't even part of it anymore. It felt like the world had turned into a movie I wasn't cast in. Everyone else had a script, a purpose, a direction, and I was just a background blur. Someone's friend, someone's colleague, someone's date. But never quite the main character in my own story. And I'd been okay with that, I think. Or I'd convinced myself I was okay with it. I'd built a whole identity around being okay with being peripheral. I was at home. In this apartment I'd carefully decorated to look like a place where someone lived their actual life. But it felt like a stage set. The books on the shelves were props. The art on the walls was something I'd chosen because I thought it said something good about me, not because it actually meant anything. Even my relationships had this quality of performance. I was playing the role of the guy who had together, who was grateful for what he had, who was fine, always fine, perpetually fine. And I wasn't fine. I was drowning in fine. I was suffocating under the weight of being consistently, reliably, aggressively fine. That day, I'd had an audition. It was for a role I actually wanted, not because it was prestigious or would look good on my resume, but because I understood the character. I understood what he wanted, what he was afraid of, what he was pretending to be. And I went into that room and I didn't get the part. But that wasn't unusual. That happens all the time in this business. Rejection is just part of the arithmetic. But on the drive home, something shifted. I was listening to music and a song came on. I can't even remember which one. But the lyrics hit me in this specific way. It was talking about wasted time, about years passing and nothing changing, about choosing a smaller life because it was safer. And I pulled over on the side of the highway, and I just sat there for maybe 20 minutes, just parked on the shoulder of this highway with cars whizzing past me. And I had this thought that I couldn't unsee afterward. I've been running from my own life, not running towards something, running from something. I'd been so focused on avoiding failure, avoiding disappointment, avoiding the possibility that I wasn't good enough, that I'd actually failed at the only thing that mattered, being present in my own existence. I went home and I sat in a chair. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I didn't do any of the things we do to avoid ourselves. I just sat there. And the numbness that I'd been living in, the thing I'd mistaken for stability, for peace, for acceptance, it finally cracked. Because I realized something that should have been obvious, but somehow wasn't. I was the one choosing this. Not the world, not fate, not limited opportunities, me. I was choosing to be small. I was choosing to wait for permission. I was choosing to perform fine instead of actually being alive. And then out of nowhere, a single thought cracked through the numbness like light through a crack in a wall. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a revelation. It was just a question that had probably been there all along, waiting for me to be quiet enough to hear it. What if the life I'm waiting for is waiting for me to choose it? It hit me like a punch disguised as a whisper. Because I understood in that moment that I wasn't broken, I was paused. Living in a version of myself that I had outgrown. A version built from fear, approval seeking, and pretending I was fine. And that version had a shelf life. And I passed the expiration date years ago. I thought about my entire life up to that point. I thought about how many times I'd said no to something because I was afraid of failing. I thought about how many times I'd played it safe because safety felt like the same thing as worthiness. I thought about how I'd built my entire identity around being the guy who was grateful for whatever he got, the guy who didn't ask for too much, the guy who was easy to work with and easy to dismiss and easy to forget. And I realized that I'd been making a bargain with the universe. The bargain was, if I'm small enough, if I'm compliant enough, if I don't ask for too much, then maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I'll be accepted. Maybe I'll finally be enough. But the universe doesn't work like that. Safety doesn't come from smallness. Acceptance doesn't come from compliance. And worthiness isn't something you get by asking for less than you deserve. There's this concept in literature called the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell wrote about it. The idea is that every meaningful story has this structure. The hero gets a call to adventure. They refuse it at first, and then something forces them to answer it. They go into the unknown, they face their fear, and they come back transformed. And what I realized sitting in that chair is that I'd been refusing my call to adventure for years. I'd been refusing it, and refusing it, and refusing it. And the universe had finally gotten tired of asking. The call wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside. It was my own soul, my own deeper self, saying, it's time. You've learned what you need to learn in this small life. Now it's time to step into the bigger one. I stood up, not because I suddenly became strong, not because I suddenly believed in myself, had a plan, or knew what came next. I stood up because I was tired. I was tired of being the person who never stood up. I was tired of waiting for someone to give me permission to exist fully. I was tired of performing fine. And in that moment, just the moment of standing up, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody saw it. There were no witnesses. The world didn't change. My circumstances didn't magically improve. I still had the same apartment, the same job, the same life. But I was different. I was present in it in a way I hadn't been in years. I was occupying my own existence instead of hovering above it like a ghost. That night, I called a friend I'd been distant with because I was afraid they'd see through my performance. I told them the truth about how I'd been feeling. And instead of rejecting me, they said they'd felt the same way. I went to an audition the next week that I would have normally avoided because I did. T think I was right for it. And I gave the most honest performance I'd given in years. I didn't get the part, but it didn't matter because I'd finally stepped out of the audience and gotten on stage. I started saying no to things that didn't feel true. I started saying yes to things that scared me. I started having conversations that mattered instead of conversations designed to make people comfortable. I started treating my life like it was mine to live instead of something that was happening to me. And here's what's strange. The more I stopped performing and started choosing, the more doors actually opened. Not because I suddenly became more talented or more deserving, but because I was finally available to the possibilities that had been there all along. I was finally present enough to see them. There's a line from Mary Oliver. She asks, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I'd been reading that line for years without actually hearing it, but sitting in that chair, with grief wearing soft shoes moving through me, I finally heard it. And I realized I had to answer the question, not with words, but with choices, with the way I spent my time, with who I let into my life, with how I treated my own body and consciousness and existence. Game of Thrones came along after this shift. And I think I only got that role because I'd finally decided to choose myself. Because when I walked into that room, I wasn't there to convince anyone of anything. I was there to offer something I'd finally decided was worth offering, the full, unprotected, honest truth of who I actually am. Not the guy performing fine, the guy who'd finally stood up and decided to live. I'm 56 now. That moment in the chair was almost 20 years ago. And I still remember the exact texture of it. The way the light was hitting the wall. The way the silence felt so loud. The way a single question could remake someone's entire life. Because that's what it was. Not a moment of sudden success or recognition or achievement. It was a moment of waking up. A moment of recognizing that I'd been asleep in my own life. And if I didn't wake up soon, I'd reach the end of it still wondering what it would have felt like to actually choose it. The smallest moments, the quiet ones nobody sees, end up becoming the ones that save you. Because salvation isn't something that happens in thunder. It happens in whispers. It happens in questions you finally ask yourself. It happens in the moment you stand up because you're tired of sitting down. And once you stand up, once you choose yourself, everything changes. Not the world. You change. Your relationship to the world changes. Your willingness to take up space changes. Your capacity to give and receive and actually be present changes. Everything inside shifts and the outside follows. I think that's what people don't understand about transformation. They think it's supposed to look big from the outside. They think it's supposed to be dramatic and obvious. But the real stuff that actually matters, it's quiet. It's a decision made in an empty room. It's a question asked when nobody's listening. It's the moment you finally get tired of being anything other than yourself. So if you're out there right now and you're performing fine and you're waiting for permission to live your actual life, and you're wondering if it's ever going to get better, I want to tell you something. It's not going to get better because circumstances change. It's going to get better because you finally decide that you're worth choosing, that your life is worth living, not just existing through. That the person you've been building yourself into is not the person you actually are. The life you're waiting for, the one that feels like it's somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere more real. That life is not waiting for you to be perfect. It's not waiting for you to have all the answers. It's not waiting for someone to give you permission. It's waiting for you to choose it. It's waiting for you to stand up. It's waiting for you to finally stop performing fine and start actually being alive. And here's what I know after years of living. That moment when you make that choice, when you finally answer the call that's been coming from inside you all along, when you decide that your life is actually worth living, that's when everything changes. Not because the world becomes different, because you become different. And when you change, everything changes. Choose yourself, not in a selfish way, in the way a tree chooses to grow, in the way a river chooses to flow, in the way the universe chooses to expand, just by being fully, completely, unapologetically yourself. That's the revolution. That's where it starts. In the quiet moment, when you decide you're done waiting, done performing, done shrinking, when you finally stand up and say, this is my life, and I'm going to live it, not tomorrow. Now, in this breath, in this moment, in this chair, or this room, or this exact place you're in right now, exactly as broken and small and uncertain as you are, choose it, choose yourself, and watch what becomes possible when you finally do.